Okay, I think we're here now, and I apologize for that. I'm going to wait just 1 minute. I do believe we are live on Twitter. Yes, we are. Awesome. Okay. Fantastic. Things are working out great right now. There we go. All right. Awesome. Yes, I do read the comments. I certainly will tonight. And we have a much better audience now. Fantastic. Okay. So, the story for me that I need you all to understand, or not, is that I am moving my base of operations to Substack. Twitter is an absolute graveyard for ideas and thinking, as I'm sure many of you have noticed. I can't stand to be on Twitter anymore. I mean, I will be, but only minimally. It is not just psychically horrific. It is, as I said, intellectually. What's the word? It's worse than a zero. It's like a black hole. It's an intellectual black hole. It is the worst place to discuss ideas. Twitter is now the worst place to discuss ideas, which is a terribly sad thing to say because Twitter was one of the best places to discuss ideas not long ago. But I am not alone in this. I think I've seen many, many people of various political persuasions say the same thing about Twitter recently. McCoos, thank you. I love you too. Wonderful audience tonight. Oh, wow, it's getting bigger. All right, so we're going to talk about what many people think might be a seismic, pivotal event or series of events going on right now in the White House of the United States of America, which has to do with foreign policy, in particular, the relationship between the United States and the state of Israel. And so on my most recent Substack post, posted today, you can find a history of right-wing opposition to the U.S. support for Israel. And that history goes back until 1948, to the founding of the state of Israel. There might have been even a few isolationists before 1948 who opposed Zionism or opposed the U.S. recognizing the state of Israel, but I haven't found those. And I have to say, and this is a little disappointing, Robert Taft, the great isolationist senator from Ohio, who was an isolationist, by the way, is a slur. There really has never been a true isolationist. There's never been a senator or congressperson in the United States who advocated for the United States to have zero interaction with the rest of the world. That's just a thing. It's just the term isolationist was actually a slur that was invented in the 1920s, 30s. Or was it Mahan in the 19th century? But it was a slur invented to discredit opponents of the United States expanding its power and military to other parts of the world. And I still find it quite amazing that most, if not all, commentators on American foreign policy today assume, think about this, assume as a given good that the United States has military bases all over the world And the biggest military bases that the United States has are in the Middle East, in particular in Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere. But they're all over the world, and there are we don't even know because they keep some of these bases secret, between 500. We know it's a minimum of 500 bases and 800 bases. And look at a map. There are many, many maps. You can Google this. You can Google the maps of the guy who does the project of tracking military bases internationally, and I'm forgetting his name, and I wish I could give you his name, but you'll probably find it if you Google it quickly here. He refused to come onto my show because he didn't like the number of women who had been on my show. But anyway, he does great work on military bases. So the empire, the U.S. empire, which has been growing not since 1945. People talk about that. People say that the origin of the U.S. empire, global empire, is after World War II. It's not then. Some people say it began with World War I, which is not a bad answer. 1919, 1920. Some people say it was in 1898 with the launching, and this is one of the better arguments, but even this is wrong, I think. 1898 with the Spanish-American War and the U.S. conquering, seizing, and colonizing Cuba, Guam, and most notably the Philippines, which we colonized and held as a we didn't call it this, but it was a colonial property of the United States from 1898 until 1941, when the Japanese kicked the United States out of the Philippines. The right answer to when the American global empire began is not 1945. It's not 1917. It's not 1898. It's 1776. And if you want to know why this is, or how this is, I should say, you should subscribe to my Substack, because in coming weeks, I will be showing many of the pieces of my forthcoming book, which will be published by Grove Atlantic next year, which is on the history of U.S. foreign relations. And it is also a history of America in the world, meaning it is a history of American culture and its various influences on other countries, other regions in the world. The American empire began in 1776. One could even argue earlier, because, as you will find in my forthcoming book and in my forthcoming Substack articles, you will see that the founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, every founding father of note, with no dissent in this, from all the way back when they were young men in the 1750s and 60s and 70s leading up to the American Revolution, all of them fantasized, dreamed about, advocated for a global American empire that would surpass in its scope and power and influence the Roman Empire and the British Empire, which in 1776 was just getting going. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, all wanted the United States to be the global hegemon from the beginning. And I sure wish that classical liberals, libertarians, and Americans generally, I sure wish that they would stop believing that the founding fathers were not interested in an overseas empire. But let's get back to the point for tonight. And this is the point of my latest piece on Substack, which has to do with the pivotal, I would say, moment in 1948, when the United States found, after great debate internally, and this is the real subject of my Substack piece today, tremendous, violent, one could say, vituperative debate within not just the United States, but within the cabinet of the President of the United States, Harry S. Truman, 1948. More than most of his cabinet and the major figures in his cabinet, the defense secretary, the secretary of state, two of his major foreign policy advisors, George Kennan and Dean Acheson, of all people, angrily, aggressively opposed the United States recognizing the state of Israel, which at that time, in May of 1948, was proclaiming or establishing its independence and was asking the United States directly, David Ben-Gurion, the Zionist leader, Chaim Weizmann, also the two main Zionist leaders at the time, were asking the White House, asking the United States at that time to recognize the new Jewish state. And amazingly, when you think about American politicians of the last 70 years since then, meaning those who hold positions in Congress, the presidency, etc. When you think about the uniformity of opinion about Israel and Zionism among major American politicians and presidents since 1948, it is stunning to think, to know, to realize that there was ever any disagreement about this thing. Because we know that every single president until 2 weeks ago has not just spoken, but demonstrated an uncritical, unquestioning, eternal commitment to supporting by almost any means the Jewish state in the Middle East. The United States, since 1967, has provided, on average, $3 billion per year in military and economic assistance to the state of Israel. But that's actually, it's interesting. A lot of Zionists now are I should say some Zionists now, a significant number of Zionists now in Israel and in America have been making the argument that, oh, Israel should no longer take any money, any assistance from the United States. But then they tell you in the 6th or 7th paragraph of their article in Tablet magazine that, oh no, this doesn't mean that the United States will no longer give a military umbrella, security umbrella to Israel, will no longer vote on Israel's behalf in the United Nations, which it has done for the last 50 plus years, vetoing many, many resolutions against Israel. It doesn't mean that the United States should stop giving intelligence assistance to Israel, which might be the most important assistance that the U.S. gives, by the way. Maybe. It's one of them. The American political establishment since 1948, one might say since 1949, when James Forrestal fell out of a window of the Bethesda Naval Hospital. And we still have not solved that crime. Ever since then, we'll get back to that in a second. Ever since then, the United States political establishment, Democrats and Republicans alike, have uniformly, as I'm sure all of you know, perhaps, uniformly supported by every means necessary the state of Israel. Funding, intelligence sharing, military security umbrella guarantees, right? I mean, not just the Iron Dome, but, promising that any threat, like recently when Iran launched some missiles at Israel, who tried to shoot them down first and who coordinated the effort to shoot them down? It was the US. And so it should be surprising, perhaps shocking to many people to know that at the very founding of the State of Israel in 1948, most of the American political establishment was opposed to this idea of supporting and helping a Jewish state, a Jewish ethno-state, establish itself and maintain itself in, of all places, Palestine, which, when the Zionists first began to occupy Palestine in the early 20th century, contained 500,000 Arabs and 10,000 Jews. 500,000 Arabs as of 1900 and 10,000 Jews. So would it be a good idea? And of course, surrounding Palestine were all of these areas, regions, and states that were full of Arab Muslims. Would it be a good idea? American politicians, many in the early 20th century, asked, would it be a good idea to establish a Jewish ethno-state right smack dab in the middle of that place, the Arab Middle East, which would, they understood, people like James Forrestal, people like George Marshall, of all people, next to Eisenhower, the most celebrated, worshipped, famous war hero of World War II, who was the Secretary of State under Truman, Dean Acheson, who was the Dean of American Foreign Policy as one of the two main public intellectuals on foreign policy for the United States in the from the 40s through the 80s, 70s, and George Kennan, who also authored most of the major doctrines in American foreign policy from the 1940s all the way through the 1970s too. All of these men, not just academically, abstractly opposed the U.S. supporting a Jewish state, a Jewish exclusive ethno-state in Palestine, surrounded by millions and millions and millions of Arab Muslims. They were violently, angrily opposed to this idea because they believed that it would drag the United States into, guess what? A forever war. This is what they said. A forever war. If we support this idea of carving out and displacing all these Arabs in that place, which has tens of millions of Arabs, for a Jewish ethno-state, when, by the way, simultaneously, Jews were filling, occupying, and enjoying fabulously powerful lives in such places as New York City, Los Angeles, And for my ancestors, Chicago. So this is the subject of the Substack post for today. But let me tell you a little bit about it. And I want to talk about some of the highlights of this new post and some things that we should think about. And so in 1948, Chaim Weizmann, David Ben-Gurion, the leaders of the new state of Israel who were asking for recognition. They had just conquered Palestine, removed many Palestinians, Arabs from these places in what is now Israel by force, sometimes by massacre, sometimes by basically pogroms against Palestinians. Interesting how things get flipped in Jewish history. They were asking for any nation state around the world, but especially the United States, the most powerful, to recognize it. And in Harry Truman's cabinet at the time, as I said, a majority of his cabinet opposed this, but it's probably more like 3/4. I can only find evidence of 2 people who weren't even in the cabinet, but they were in the White House as advisors. This was Clark Clifford, who was the chief counsel for the White House for the president, and David Niles, who was a junior foreign policy advisor for Truman, who was a Jewish and a Zionist. Only 2 who advocated for the United States to recognize Israel. But as I said, the Secretary of Defense, Forrestal, Secretary of State, George Marshall, Dean Acheson, George Kennan, the Undersecretary of State, Robert Lavelle. It goes on and on and on. They issued arguments to Truman. They said to him, they had meetings with him in May of 1948 when the issue was present. And they said to him, if you recognize this thing, we, the United States, get this, will be in wars in the Middle East in perpetuity. Prescient, to say the least. Prescient, to say the least. George Marshall, as I said, in the 1940s, this guy was one of the top heroes, one of the major generals in World War II for the United States. The Marshall Plan, of course, was named after him. It was his idea, the funding of European reconstruction after the war. He was basically untouchable as a celebrity. You know what he said to Truman when they had a meeting in the Oval Office about this question, about whether to recognize Israel? He said to Truman, if you do this, and this is 1948, this is May of 1948, the election is in November, so 6 months later. George Marshall, Truman's Secretary of State, said to Truman directly in May of 1948, if you recognize the state of Israel, I will not vote for you. I will not vote for you. And essentially threatened to resign. I mean, that's how important it was to these men. James Forrestal, Secretary of Defense, said to Truman, what is wrong with you and the few people in the White House who supported Israel? What is wrong with you? Do you not know? As of 1948, there were 500,000 Jews. They had risen. The number had risen because the Zionists had entered Palestine in large numbers between 1900 and 1948. So by 1948, it was about 500,000. He said, there's 500,000 Jews there, but millions and millions of Arabs. How on earth will this not be perpetual war? If those Arabs, some of those Arabs, must be displaced, dispossessed, disenfranchised, and brutalized in the process, which is exactly what happened in 1947 and 1948. they will want to fight you. Because as Jabotinsky himself, the great Zionist leader from the 20s and 30s, wrote, as did Ben Gurion, as did Theodor Herzl himself, all of them, all the major leading original Zionists said, historically, every conquered population, every colonized population, every one of them, from the American Indians to the South Africans to everybody, has resisted violently their occupation. And so even the Zionists themselves, before they established the state of Israel, said this state will be a perpetual wartime state. And this is one of the reasons, maybe the main reason, that Christopher Hitchens, remember him, who wanted war with much of the Muslim world in his final years of life? Even Christopher Hitchens said that Zionism is the stupidest idea he's ever heard of. All it will do is make Jews who live there, and actually around the world too, less safe. For Jews, it is a catastrophic idea. And guess how many Jews have died in the United States from political violence since 1948? Basically none. You could say maybe 10 or 20. There have been a couple of shootings in synagogues in the last 75 years that, look like hate crimes, but I mean, 10 to 20 people. Terrible, but 10 to 20 people. In Israel, 35,000 Jews have been killed in political violence since the founding of the State of Israel. Of course. My good friend Batya Ungar Sargon has said, and she is a hardcore Zionist who supports the war in Gaza and all the rest of it. She herself and many other Zionists have maybe inadvertently said that America is the true Zion for Jews, which it absolutely is. And so I am very grateful that my Jewish ancestors from Lithuania and Ukraine chose, and they were approached by Zionists in the 1890s. This is when my ancestors left Europe, following the pogroms, the great pogroms in Ukraine, the Odessa pogroms, the Kiev pogroms in the 1890s. My family members decided that they were approached by Zionists, as in Ukraine, this is where Zionism was strongest in the 1890s. And they were offered this thing. Hey, move to Palestine. Help us establish a Jewish state. And they said no. And they chose instead to get on a boat and head to Ellis Island. And they eventually settled in Chicago and then in Portland, Oregon. And I'm very grateful, because if our family had chosen to emigrate to Palestine instead of to Chicago, many of my family members would be dead. So James Forrestal, the Secretary of Defense, and George Marshall, the Secretary of State, and Robert Lavelle, the Undersecretary of State, and Dean Acheson and George Kennan, the chief foreign policy advisors to Harry S. Truman, in 1948, said to him, "We will be at war forever. The Arabs, if we do this, will hate us. They will attempt terrorist attacks on Americans." Incredibly prescient. The Arabs in that region will be so anti-American, they will choose to align themselves with the Soviet Union. Remember, this is during the Cold War, or the beginning of the Cold War, which also happened. Multiple Arab states, Egypt, Iraq, Iran for a moment, did in fact aligned themselves, or at least took aid and military material from the Soviet Union. But most importantly, yes, this inaugurated. What have we seen for now 78 years? What have we seen? Exactly what Forrestal and Marshall and the rest, these are, by the way, these are not anti-imperialists. Forrestal and Marshall were into the American empire idea. They just thought that this particular part of it was self-destructive. And so MAGA, when we look at what MAGA has been doing in just in recent months, which is splitting, I think this is right, and I think other people have said this as well, it is truly splitting over this issue. I said on Twitter that Israel is the rock upon which MAGA will break apart. And that appears to be happening. And God bless that. Those people in MAGA, in the MAGA coalition, I don't mean necessarily office holders, but who have very serious power among MAGA faithful, among Trump voters, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, many podcasters, Jake Shields, who opposes Israel for probably anti-Semitic reasons, but he still does, and he has a massive audience that's almost entirely Trump voters. The Hodge twins. I could go on. You've seen this happening. They don't know this, I don't think. But this is what my article in Substack is intended to provide them. They don't know that they have a historical lineage that's not left-wing. It's not Noam Chomsky. It's not Norman Finkelstein. It's not all these left-wing anti-Zionists that wear keffiyehs and wave Palestinian flags. No, there's another lineage, another historical tradition that MAGA comes from in its relationship to Israel. And that's in the Truman White House. James Forrestal, George Marshall, and the rest. Now, Truman eventually, of course, as we know, in May of 1948, said to all of them, you know what? And there's quotes about this, and you can see this in my piece, but he says, hey, look, it's an election year. And he said, I have no Arabs in my constituency. Like there were in 1948 in the United States, there were almost no Arabs in America. The immigration from Arab states had not really begun yet. But he said, but I have many Jews and Zionists with a lot of money who tend to be Democrats who want to fund my campaign. He said this. He said this. And that's why he went with the state of Israel against most of his own cabinet and advisors. A remarkable moment. Not remarkable. World historic moment. Truly a pivotal moment, right? So let's talk about James Forrestal, the Secretary of Defense, who was the leading well, he and Marshall were the most vituperative anti-Zionists in the Truman cabinet. So May of 1948 is the debate within the White House, and they recognize Israel in that month. Truman recognizes Israel in that month. 10 months later, March 1949, Truman fires Forrestal, forces his resignation. And he cites two reasons. One is that Forrestal is generally antagonistic to Truman's defense and foreign policy proposals. Number two is that James Forrestal is crazy. There were media reports in early 1949 that James Forrestal, the Secretary of Defense, was suffering from mental illness. And maybe he was. But then the evidence shows that James Forrestal, these are the words that are used by the official naval report, the official US government report, was admitted, suggesting it wasn't voluntary, was admitted to Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is a 16-story tower. Strange for a hospital, but it was. You can see pictures of it. 16-story tower, hospital. He was admitted to there, and then less than 2 months later, he was found at the base of that hospital wearing only his pajama pants, dead. Did he fall? Was it suicide? There was no real suicide note. There's video. You can see video. Look it up. James Forrestal, March 1949, White House. It's on YouTube. Look at him. This is just 2 months earlier. 2 months earlier. Looking quite chipper, hanging out with Truman and Marshall. So, is this an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory? Maybe. So let me say this, and let me say this very, very clearly. I have still seen zero actual evidence that Israel or the Zionists had anything to do with the death of James Forrestal. None. Zero. None. None. No actual hard evidence of any kind. I've not seen it. That they had anything to do with James Forrestal's death. But let me tell you what was happening in the 5 years leading up to James Forrestal's death. Zionists, specifically the Irgun militia or terrorist organization led by Menachem Begin, the Lehi militia or terrorist organization, Zionist organization, which was led by or included many elements from the Jewish gangs in the United States, the Purple Gang in Detroit, Murder Inc. in New York. Many of them moved to Palestine in the 1940s to help the Zionists conquer the land from the Palestinians and did a lot of the killing for the Zionists in that time. What those two groups were doing, the Irgun and the Lehi, in the 1940s was killing British high-level officials. I'm talking lords. They killed or attempted to kill 3 lords. The head of the British mandate in Palestine. They killed a Swedish diplomat and a UN mediator, Folke Bernadotte. They killed 780 British officials and police officers, and they tortured and hanged British police officers who they believed were standing in the way of them establishing a Jewish state. This is all, by the way, completely documented. It's not even controversial. This is all absolute fact. They killed with no recourse. I mean, no hesitation. Major British officials who, of course, were governing Palestine until 1948. And so why is it impossible? Why is it ridiculous? Why is it a conspiracy theory to suggest that the Zionist militias in the 1940s might have had something to do with James Forrestal's death? That's all. But even if we just eliminate the James Forrestal story, we now know, now that we know this history, that the current emerging, and this is Trump himself, right? He just did these series of deals in the Middle East, cutting out Israel entirely. He negotiated directly with Hamas to release Adon Alexander, and all the Zionists are horrified by this. He's launching negotiations with Iran directly, and Israel's not invited. I mean, it goes on and on. He just gave a speech in Saudi Arabia, which sounds like an anti-imperialist speech in which the United States should have no business in the Middle East. And there are many reports, and I'm sure this is true, must be at this point, that about 2 weeks ago, Trump cut off all communication with Netanyahu, has refused to talk to him. That's never happened in American political history. No president has ended communication with an Israeli prime minister. Never. This is unprecedented. Now, this could be because Netanyahu pissed off Trump, and Trump is entirely egotistical and just feels like this is an assault on his own personhood, and that's why he's mad at Israel. But I don't think so. Because we have Steve Witkoff saying, and this is in the Substack piece, saying that we had to go our own way. We had to stop talking to Israel because they just want to continue the war. Because they just want to continue. They don't want the war to end. That's what Witkoff said. And so what Witkoff said in 2025 is exactly what James Forrestal and George Marshall said in 1948, which is that this state will be a perpetual wartime state. And if we attach ourselves to it, we will be in perpetual war, which in the Middle East, America, has been true, hasn't it? We haven't stopped warring in the Middle East since I was born. Yeah. And we all know this. And so then, after Forrestal's death, after Israel's recognition and establishment as an independent state in the late 40s, since then, unfortunately, the right wing in America has been muted. The opponents, I should say, the opponents of Zionism, the opponents of supporting Israel have been were muted for many years in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. There wasn't much talk. However, a couple of notable exceptions. Again, I discussed this in Substack. You can look at Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan has been consistently an opponent, not necessarily an anti-Zionist. He doesn't take a position on whether the Jews should try to establish a state in the Middle East. That's the same as me. I don't have a position on that. If they want to try that, good luck. I don't think you're going to survive. But that's been his position. It's just that the United States should not have any part of that. Because he said, like Forrestal et al., it just means we'll be dragged into forever wars in the Middle East. Forever wars in the Middle East is what support for Israel will get us. Look what we got. Have we stopped fighting in the Middle East? No, never. There have been troops, even in Iraq, my entire lifetime. I was born in 1965. There have been troops, American troops in the Middle East, all the time since then. Major bases, major wars, major battles, major incursions, assassinations. Soleimani, the Iranian general, was just the latest major assassination conducted by the United States against some Arab leader at the behest of who? Your neighbors in America, the people who live down the street. Did they want to kill Soleimani? Did your kid's high school teacher want to kill Soleimani? Did your dad, your mom, your buddies, your softball team, did you hear people talking about needing to kill Soleimani? No Americans had ever heard of the guy. So very clearly, This was an ultra elite, top notch, top level, teeny tiny percentage of the American population wanted to kill Soleimani, which they did. And that tiny little foreign policy elite just happens to be, and has always been, completely beholden to the interests of the state of Israel. And so the emerging opposition to this insane relationship that is happening not so much on the left, and let me say something about the left here. The left, the Palestine solidarity movement, the people who do the protests, the people who do the encampments on the college campuses, those people, they seem almost uninterested in the most important question, which is whether the United States should stop funding Israel, stop supporting it, stop aiding it in all the ways that it does. When the United States stops aiding Israel in all the ways that it does, there's no chance really that Israel can continue to exist as a Jewish exclusive ethno-state. And that is why anyone, regardless of your politics, regardless of your motivations, who doesn't want the U.S. continuing to support this thing should be focused exclusively on that question and not be wearing keffiyehs, not be flying Palestine flags at our protests, not blocking bridges and freeways and saying death to America and burning American flags. That will convince exactly 0 Americans. Imagine if the pro-Palestine movement instead, you don't have to wave American flags, you don't have to be patriotic, you don't have to wear red, white, and blue, but just present yourselves as yourselves, which is regular, normal Americans marching in the streets saying, we don't want this. For us, for our interests, we don't like killing children, we don't like killing women, we don't like killing tens of thousands of civilians, but more importantly, it costs money. We're broke. We're in debt in the trillions. We have gained nothing from our support for Israel except for wars in Iraq, wars in Afghanistan, wars in Libya, wars in Sudan, wars in Syria, wars in Lebanon, and this most horrific, not war, but slaughter of trapped people in Gaza. It does nothing for America. We are America first, as I wish most Americans would be if they were conscious. That lineage, there is a lineage. Robert Novak is the other one, besides Pat Buchanan. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even into the 2000s, Robert Novak, who, if you're older than 40, you know that name. He was one of the most important, most famous political columnists. This is before the internet, when columnists in newspapers kind of dominated the political discourse. He was huge. He had a TV show. He wrote hundreds of columns against the state of Israel and arguing consistently that the U.S. right wing, did I mention that? Robert Novak was right wing, conservative, Reagan supporter, the whole 9 yards, hated the left, absolutely right wing. He wrote hundreds of columns from the 70s through the early 2000s arguing that the U.S. should stop supporting this genocidal, insane, maniacal, violent apartheid state in Israel. Right-winger. Pat Buchanan, at the same time, very right-winger, saying the same thing. They were basically alone on the right. I mean, I know there's going to be people here going to say like Murray Rothbard, and there were some fairly fringe people on the American right who didn't have much say in American politics or opposed to Israel, sure. But these Pat Buchanan and Robert Novak had major voice, major platforms for decades. They were arguing against this in the very same terms that James Forrestal, rest in peace, argued in the 1940s. So MAGA, Trump voters, you who are questioning, who are skeptical at all about this relationship between the United States and the Jewish state in Israel, you have a lineage. And it's not Noam Chomsky, it's not Norman Finkelstein, it's not all these keffiyeh wearing lefty communists on college campuses. It's not that. You have your own lineage, you have your own historical tradition. And that's why I wrote this article, because I want to give those people their own, help them find their own lineage and tradition, their own intellectual base, their historical base from which to wage this new fight. And if this time, unlike in 1948, this time they are successful, and it looks like they have a chance to actually be successful, to finally sever the ties between these two countries, Jews will benefit. 35,000 have died in Israel. If they left Israel and moved to the United States or Europe, where most of them are from, by the way, they're less likely to die. This is good for Jews. It's great for Americans because no longer will there be a reason for Arabs to hate us. That'd be nice. And yes, it will be great for those children if you care. You don't have to, and you really don't have to. I don't need you to care at all. I just need you to care about the first 2 points. I need you to care about American self-interest. But if you do care about the children and the women and the young men, missing arms, missing eyes, dead, lying under rubble, it's great for them too, at least for those who might end up like them in Gaza, in the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, etc. Clearly, it'll be great for the world. So check out my Substack. I wish I had the link in the bio here. That was dumb. But go to Thaddeus Russell's Substack. You'll see it. Go to my Twitter. You'll see it there. Take a look. And I hope to see you on Substack, my new base of operations. Thank you all for showing up. Great crowd tonight. I did not expect this many people to show up. And I'm sorry for the delay. And I very much appreciate it. And I hope to see you all in one capacity or another very soon. Peace.